Thank you guys for coming. It's been a packed house all day. If you haven't been to this room yet, this is all practical takeaway talks. Nothing heady. We don't need that. Not here. Maybe a little. I don't know. We'll see. This is Edouard Maleix. He is going to talk about how AI-first dev teams build collective intelligence, which I think is on all of our minds today. Can we give him a round of applause, please?
Hi, everyone. Just a second. I will switch focus to not disturb so that you don't see my notification. So, hi, everyone. As you noticed, I think today even more than before, agents are really everywhere in our work, in our conversation. I mean, I've been talking with people and eavesdropping conversation. It seems like, yeah, it's what keeps us busy, and we are preparing for a new shift, which will move agents from our isolated environment to conquer teams. So, if agents write our code, review our code, even start to plan our sprint, so move it towards management position, it makes me wonder what our agents learn yesterday that our team can use today or tomorrow and the days after. So I want to share and help you find out. Before we talk about any solution, I want to address the familiar obstacles. You know, you probably experimented maybe with your agents that run pseudo-autonomously. You have Claude in auto mode or Pi running headless, or OpenClaw, if you're into that, even though it seems like it has a bad publicity today. All the small discoveries, all the tiny learnings, all the incidents that are inside the session, they rarely make it out of it. They just end up closed here. So corrections evaporate. Eventually, and that's what we probably all did, we start to create skills or rules or any piece of documentation that can get injected inside the agent's context. But then what happens? You have lots of rules that piles up, some skills, some project notes, and yeah, they just pile up, same as your context window. It really gets crowded, and you can barely say when it's getting used, if it's still useful, if it became stale, and even if it gets activated when you expect it to be activated. So in the end, if we are in the context of engineering, when it's time for the review of a given work to start, maybe the PR can show up green, like all test passes, you have some PR description, you follow the spec. You cannot even tell actually, what lessons shape that PR, shape that work. So I would imagine that this sounds a bit familiar, and I'm not an alien when I say that. So after thinking about it a little bit, I've been thinking at dev teams, like humans and agents included, they don't need just another Wikipedia, a wiki that you have in your teams. I don't think I've heard that dev teams should stay locked with their agent in their fusional relationship. And apparently, none of the speakers today think so, because it seems like, yeah, Teams is really everywhere. So, agent work create lessons every day. Like you have those lessons that are captured in the session, but the Teams is not learning. So, what could we do to get out of that loop? Well, I think that we need a sort of knowledge factory. Like as the work go, you have that system that catches mistake, interruptions, and turns them into some guidance. Then you check whether those guidance actually help. Naturally, you will let some of those guidance fade because some knowledge just decay. We have to accept that. And that can happen when the model evolves, when your code base change. So the idea is that instead of having static documentation, we have something that constantly moves, live, dies the day after, not a problem. Just need to accept that. So before I go a bit deeper in the theory and the experiment, I won't tell you a bit where that comes from. So that's me. I'm a freelance consultant. I help tech leads and CTO on authentication, application performance, dev productivity challenges. And as I was helping some customers' dev team to adopt coding agents, I've been building an open source infrastructure and some set of tools to turn those repeated friction that all the dev teams encounter into something that help teams on board in a common ground. So what I want today is to share some of those learnings, to share some of the primitives that I think could help in that way. But beware, it's all very experimental. Don't imagine that I tell you this is the way we should do it. It's like everyone today, we experiment in our way. We try to find some places to put it in place and test it. And here that's the same with that framework. So I think the solution should start at the low level. And the lowest level, I think, is the change level. So if we don't want the agents learning all the lessons to just become some folklore, we need to track who did the work, when they did, and what was the reasoning behind it, what lessons, what knowledge they use to do those, to make those decisions. So we need some evidence. To illustrate that, the sort of weird moment we are in, that we float in, that's a PR I opened some months ago for a Fastify plugin. And knowing that the maintainer, famous guy in the JS ecosystem, was not really AI agent friendly at the time, I just did my best to mask all traces from Cloud Code. So that PR was really written, I think 95% by Cloud. And I don't have a shame to assume that. And it did the work. I mean, I did my best to have the agent writing good tests. The description is fine enough, particularly the issue, the code as well. And all the commits are under my name. They have even my GPG signature, wonderful, and Cloud Code opened that PR under my name. So the illusion is perfect. But I think that's one of the problems that we should address. Like right now, who can assume that work? It's even worse for the PR reviews. I guess you might have received some PR reviews authored by one of your teammates, but actually authored by Cloud Code. Isn't it insulting? Well, I think that is. And that's why I wanted to first start with that groundwork and give the agents an identity. So that's the first primitive, the first building block. The identity gives us a clear, separate actor. It gives us some signed commits. And then at that stage, you already solve one small problem. The agent does not hide behind your name or behind a Cloud Code name or whatever. And also, it starts to create some sort of boundary, because if the agent has its own identity, it has its own identifier, it can have its own access rules, its own set of authorization, and it stops surfing on your existing permission as a human. So access control, it's really about access control here, and it opens the way for that. But of course, identity is just the starting point. It starts the track of attribution. It tells us who acted, but it does not tell us why the action made sense at all at the time it was done. That's where the second primitive comes, the diary. So absolutely opinionated form of building blocks. You could give it lots of names, but at some point I needed to give it a name. And I think diary fit to describe the place where it stops being just the work and the lesson stop being a throwaway artifact. So the diary is the home for all the discoveries, all the what the F moment, all the decision making that happen during the work. It's also the first spot where you can also have some sort of access boundary that rotates. For example, you could have your diary shared by a team, the diary that could be purely personal for your style of work preferences, or scoped to a repository, or scoped to a project. It's the first point where you can define those policies. What matters in the end is that if the work or decision matters, you need to land it somewhere before it disappears. So in practice, this is what it could look like. You would have your commit done by the agents. So here, linked to a GitHub application. You can see the Le Greffier bot. With a reference to the entry that capture the procedure, the reasoning behind the work. And then you can already start to do a bit less like guesswork. You can start to go a bit further than just the diff and the commit messages. You can start to have the rationale behind. But that's also still just the beginning. Now we need to find a way to capture the lessons that the next session can reuse. So that act start when you have to capture correction and that they stop belong to one diff and become reusable knowledge. But there's a long way there. Before I introduce how we could capture those incidents, I want to just create a common ground of understanding. So I will take an example of where an agent can stumble. So, and that's a true case. So on Monday, your agent updates your REST API or whatever API, whatever contract you might have. It remembers to regenerate the open API specs, the TypeScript SDK that you have that is also derived from the open API specs. But you also have a Go SDK in that code base, and it completely missed it. On Tuesday, you have the same situation. So in my case, I use the best French curse word, and the agent promised that, okay, it won't happen again. But you know what follows on Wednesday. You have the same trap. The Go client goes stale again. So, of course, to be clear, this kind of example, the CI should catch it and would catch it in that case before it's even merged. The point is not really here. The idea is to save some iteration, because if you always have to wait for some sort of post-processing to catch the situation, well, in the meantime, before you had any commit and push, the agent has been, for example, updating the test with outdated SDK. So the idea is that we don't want to waste iteration. We want the agent to know the practice like a human would do. So here I will be a bit Captain Obvious after all the work done today and all the discussion. So why did the Tuesday lesson never stick? Well, simply because the correction that we did here to remind the agent to generate the Go SDK stayed trapped in one session. So the Wednesday agent, the Wednesday session, just doesn't know about it. And that's the same for the team. That's where it becomes a problem, because not only my agent would stumble on that, but also all the other teams' agent would also stumble on the same thing. So what it does, it just falls back, luckily or unluckily, what's already in the context or what the model already knows. And yeah, here you just count on luck for the agent to do the right decision. No way to tell if that will be the right one. So I said before, the knowledge land in diary. But diary, diary is a bit more granular. Is a bit more granular than that. What you have inside the diary it's entry. So the entry will be used to describe different events. So you will have 4 categories. I'll let you read them to capture different type of situation. For the case of the Tuesday or Wednesday incident with the API story, it's an episodic entry. It's a what the F moment. That's where it belongs, and that's where it should be captured. And here's an example entry. So that reminds me a little bit the knowledge unit that some other people talked about this morning. Here it was captured during when the agent used the wrong driver, the wrong DB driver method, which totally missed the transaction session. Like, that can be quite a mess if you can imagine. No rollback possible, so you'd have either duplicate write or whatever. So here, clearly not something that we want to keep doing at the next session. So here, this example entry is also linked to other entries, and that's where it can become interesting, because you have isolated event that can be linked then between each other. And here we have that entry that was created originally standalone, but then we can link it to the PR review that made the notice, like say, hey, what the fuck did you do? You don't use that. Sorry for the swear, I'm French. I let myself go. So you can track both that PR comment and the fix that is linked to that so that it does not happen again. And the idea is that 6 months from now on, you can, if you land on one of those entries, you can also land on the fix and the lesson that goes with it. So at this stage, you already made some effort to understand entry, to have that framework. So what you do at that stage actually is pretty simple. It's passive accumulation. You have that system in place, that workflow in place, and you should have your agent that just capture passively these entries, these incidents, these lessons, this knowledge. Because that's when you have enough entries that you can start to shape into something that really is helpful. And the curation starts by discovering what you have. That becomes honestly the magical moment, because you have no idea, you cannot track all the entries that was done, even less when your team is large, because it can come from everywhere. Useful stuff, useless stuff. So the idea is that you start to map a bit the territory, you start to find scopes, you start then to slice those scopes into some given incident. For example, in my case, the database incident that I noticed. And then you expand those entries, you start to check the relationship that they have. And eventually, if you have a hunch, you just do row search like pure rag. And at some point, when you have some thematic entries, you can build some sort of pack of knowledge. So a pack, that's a small curated bundle of entries that you should, or eventually at some point your agent, should pick for one task, for one really area. So it's clearly not your children's bags of toys. So if you have parents over here, you can imagine what's a bag of toys, like lots of mess, and call it a day, it's tidied. No, it's not like that. More like a gallery exhibition. You have to make sense with that pack. So here it's an example, a visual representation of one of those packs, actually the first one, related to database practice in the project that I'm using to build. So it's really just dog fooding. That was the first use case. And every entry here that you can see, it's really example of stuff that broke, that are then reused to compose that pack. But the pack is not yet what the agent reads. There is one more step before that. And that step is really important and very sensitive. It's at that stage, so you have all those entries referenced inside the pack, and you need to answer yourself, how will I load that knowledge inside the agent? So I didn't want to do something out of the ordinary. I just imagine, okay, let's just build some markdown files out of those row entries into something that can be really usable by an agent. So this is typically another task assisted by LLM. You will have the agent fetching the entries that are referenced in that pack, trims them eventually to fit a token budget, and then you can load that rendered pack in the agent. And what's very important here is that every section, you can see, points to a given entry. And every section keep the attribution live. So here you can see the source with the entry identifier, the human that was operating, and the agent identifier as well. So the idea is to really be able to not have just a skill that says, that's how you do things. It's more like, that's how you do things because we got bitten somewhere that hurts, and we don't want that to happen again. So to summarize it, that Act 2, we have now a sort of pipeline, or even more, a loop. So interruption becomes an entry, the right entries become a pack, then the pack becomes something the agent can read, and then in the end, the lesson that one developer paid for, or one autonomous agent paid for, becomes a team asset. Actually, it's even, there is even a discipline. I did not hear the word yet today, but it seems to be called compound engineering. So let's see if that happens and we hear more about it. Now the harder and more interesting question is, who decides what survives, what knowledge remains? So in a human team, no one really decides alone. You have some ADR, or however we want to call them, some wikis, the traces in the code reviews, some postmortems eventually. Sadly, that happens. But that's knowledge moving at the human pace. And now these days, we try to adapt our pace to the agent pace. So when agent writes some tiny lessons all day long, there is no feedback loop like that, at least yet, not much. It's just lots of individual initiative getting built these days. And they produce correction faster than those systems can absorb them. So that means we need some instrument to judge them. So that will not be novelty, because today I think if you did not hear about it, you learned a lot about evals, I guess. I will still talk about it, but I will go briefly, considering that you already learned about it today, and I don't want to waste your attention. But here in our case, for those render pack, what we want to know and evaluate is that is whether the pack is true to the entries. Does it transform the entries? Does it include all of them? Does it actually help on a real scenario? So that's the most typical eval use case. And the other thing that you want to know, it's the activation. It's to answer, did the skill, did knowledge get loaded on time? So here in that session, we will just focus on fidelity and usefulness. Before I go into the process, there is something a bit more technical I would like to spend time on. It's the environment that those judges will run in. I did not hear it much emphasized today, but maybe I just missed the good talk. But I think all those agents' tasks should run in a controlled environment. And here what I built for that case is just an environment that runs in its own sandbox. A little bit like, thank you. A little bit like you could have with Codex Sandbox, but here, controlled environment. So you can decide what files can be accessed. You can decide also what network calls can be done. You really control that environment. So there is no leak from the outside or inside out. So that's where the LLM works, in that VM. What's unique, though, it's for every task, its input. So you have some prompt template, some set of criteria that will allow us to sort of score or assess the result, and some references. And of course, we want to have some sort of context that will be loaded in that agent runtime, because that's the context that will be used either to improve our agent, but here in that case, that's that context that will be judged, that will be assessed. So here, in that example, to evaluate the fidelity of those render pack, we had those pre-simplified criteria with their own binary score. And the first looked great. Yeah, composite score of almost 1, free win, free lunch. Okay, I won, I'm a genius. But actually, if you spend a little bit of time on eval, you can see that lazy prompt or badly calibrated criteria can just backfire and be giving a false sense of safety. So, to cut it short, the idea is that before you run an LLM judge, you are the judge. You do the work that the judge will do yourself. And you check if those criteria would really match and catch something, and same for the prompt. It should reflect your own questioning, your own way to score things. Now about usefulness. So, okay, we can say now that the agent did not lie about the knowledge pack that was created, but now we want to see if it's really useful. So here I will also keep it short because eval, you heard about it, but the idea is that you give your agent runtime a task that reproduce some of those incidents that you already had. So that's good, because if you already captured the incident, you already have the situation, you already have the context. And that's why it's really good, because it becomes really difficult if you invent tasks or catch them from the past. It's much easier if you already know the incident, the story behind it, and the task. So here, that's one of those tasks, to catch up and reproduce that Go incident, that Go SDK missing. And we run that with the context. We run it again with the context, so that render pack that gives the agent knowledge. And what matters is the delta. And so you have then another agent that will run, the judge, to score based on those criteria. So, of course, here I want to show a success story, but it's a genuine one. The idea is that for that Go client scenario, without the pack, we fail at 67 every time the Go SDK was missing from the agent work. Whereas with the pack, it was always passing, even after repeating that same task. So the idea is that you don't repeat the same mistake. You just use those packs to feed the agent the right knowledge. I don't know how much I have remaining. I will keep it very short. Now the last act. If we consider that we have agents that are getting autonomous, that can learn by themselves and inject knowledge by themselves, what stops us in some way is to get ready to make agents run autonomously. And like one of the talk mentioned earlier, there is a big vanity thing here, because the agent is really tempted to please us, and it's quite pleasing actually to have the agent that pleases us and answer in our direction. So I think one of the first psychological limits is just to forget about that concept of having someone that always answers like you have the good suggestion. You need to get rid of that if you want to go to the path of having autonomous agents. And once you get rid of that, you can start to consider to have tasks being created automatically, like some agents or some human that create those tasks like fulfill this issue, or do this PR review, and you have that big bucket with lots of tasks, and you do some voluntary work. The idea is that you don't assign any task, you just have agent with some set of capabilities, and any of those agents can fire a task if it matches his capability. So it really picks voluntarily. And then what's interesting is that if you build on top of the previous work, all those autonomous tasks always keep attribution alive. So it means that you build even faster knowledge, build even faster correction. So what matters is just that you, as the human, keep the goal, the judgment, and the responsibility, and the agents keep the continuity, the repetition, the bothersome work. And if that infrastructure exists, you can imagine identity that grows even more, like in more interesting direction. You could have dedicated coder agents, some critic agents, some maybe management agents. The idea is that you can specialize agents that will pick the task and promise that they will fulfill it properly. And then you can enable some sort of trust because those agents specialize, a bit like individual contributors in companies. So to conclude, I'll just leave you with that question. So what did your agents learn yesterday that your team still knows today? And to finish, a bit of self-promo. If you are curious or interested and want to have a look at that experiment I mentioned, you can scan that QR code. That will lead you to the repository that is just the whole infrastructure that I mentioned. So if you want to comment it, toast it, roast it, however you want to do it, please do. And if you try it, let me know what broke, what does not work. And that's it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much for that. We have 2 minutes for questions, if anyone would like to ask anything.
Thanks for the great talk. Couple of questions. Is this parallel to MemPalace, or is that idea similar to MemPalace, or you?
There is one component, the memory part, but okay. Honestly, I did not spend most of my time refining how best the memory works, how best it's stored, and how best it can be retrieved. Because for me, what matters more is that it's providing the primitives and the tools for the complete workflow. Because I don't think memory in isolation can answer that problem of sharing knowledge between teams.
One last one is, I think the examples you showed is pretty good, but in the life of a developer, it's not as simple as fix, and then you attribute, and then there's a bit of a chain of it. It's a lot more nuanced than that. When you started using it yourself, did you come across edge cases or nuances where that simple pattern might not work and you needed to do some more complicated mapping?
I mean, it's not as instantaneous as I might make it appear. That entry that captured the incident, it's still there, it lives, and the fix probably won't land on the same day. So clearly the entry is just here to stay, and here it's about having your workflow that will have the intelligence to pick the incident that already exists and compare with what already exists. Because sometimes it's just good to just accept that there is an incident, and if there is no recurrence, you don't care. It's just a one-time, a one-off. But if it happens more often, then it's time to indeed create some relationship and consolidate maybe your workflow.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more takers for questions?
Thank you so much for the talk. I think it was really interesting. And I think the question I have is, how do you approach kind of managing and maintaining this knowledge base as your code base and product evolve, and maybe something that was true like a month ago is no longer true?
Nice one. Honestly, not as much different. If you already use skills or these sort of things, it's very similar in a way, because you have all those entries that you don't really bother. As I said, you just accumulate that knowledge. And it's when you start to build some actual render pack that it becomes similar to what you already have, because those rendered packs, they are just skills in the end. They are markdown file that are then converted to skills. So you maintain them kind of the same way as you would maintain skill in the modern workflow. So you have to run some regular evals with the model that your team is using. If they are not useful enough or do not bring any benefit, then it dies. And if it still keep bringing benefits, then you keep it. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Partially?
Okay, then I need to recreate this. How do I choose? Is it still manual or advanced?
It's a mix. That curation, you will start manually at first, because first of all, you need to get used. It's a new habit, a new workflow, and I think every workflow, before we should lend it to an LLM, we need to master it as human, because then you need to explain that LLM how it should do things. And if you're not able to explain it, how can you expect an LLM to do it for you? So yes, the curation starts manually, assisted by agent to fetch all the things that you would want to discover. And once you start to understand the pattern, then you can start to delegate that curation as well to agents. So that's how it works in practice.
Cool. If you guys have any more questions, I'm sure you can find Edouard out and about. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you too. Thanks for your attention.